Good day, everyone. This is John Gressett. Welcome back. Here at COPA University, one of our main aims, whether or not it's through these sessions or the in-person CPPs, is to keep all COPA members at their peak performance. So let's get right to it. This meeting will be recorded. Please do keep your video off and yourself on mute. In our last session, somebody left their video on as they went into the bathroom. Let's please try to avoid that this time round. Do ask your questions via the built-in chat feature in Zoom. If you've never used it, no problem. Just look for the word chat in some of the pull-down menus. If you still can't find it, look for the ellipse symbol. It's those three dots, the universal symbol for more. Touch or click on those dots and you'll see the word chat. Now we're breaking up the questions into two groups. If the month of your birthday falls between January and June, send your questions over to the Jan-June questions. If your month of your birthday falls between July and December, then you likewise will send it to July-December question. Please do ask your questions early and often. Don't wait till the end. In our last session, many people waited till the end and we couldn't get to them all. Ask early. In fact, if you have a question right now that you know you want to ask, send it in now. Any other questions that you have, please send to Zoom Help and anything else. We are all dying to get back into the in-person sessions over the weekend. Hopefully 2021 will allow us to do that, and we're working hard to make it happen. So without further ado, let me introduce Ed Waters, the president of COPA University. Over to you, Ed.
Thanks, John, and welcome everyone to our 5th COPA U online class, and I know you're going to love this one. Our partners at the National Air Traffic Controllers Association will present one of their more popular classes, which focuses on airport operations, which, as we all know, are one of the greatest sources of pilot deviations. Today's presenters are among the best in the business: Richard Kennington from the Portland, Oregon Tower, and Bridget Singh-Ratanakel from the Dallas-Fort Worth Tower. You may recognize Richard's name as he recently wrote an article in COPA Pilot magazine about the training process to become a controller, and Bridget is the National Runway Safety Representative to ICAO. And if being experienced controllers isn't enough, both Richard and Bridget are certified pilots. So welcome Richard and Bridget, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks. I appreciate you having us, and we are indeed excited to be here to talk about a topic that is more prolific in the system than you might assume. As he mentioned, it deals with runway safety. So allow Bridget and I to show you a video to kind of introduce you to what our topic is today.
Continental Flight 203 was on a routine flight from Houston Intercontinental to Corpus Christi International. Visibility was 5 to 6 miles. At 2,000 feet, a cloud layer was obscuring the flight crew's view. Flight 203 was cleared for a localizer approach to runway 31 at Corpus Christi. The glide slope was out of service. The flight intercepted the localizer for runway 31. The captain saw a runway at the edge of the clouds was cleared for a visual approach and said, "Let's land." The autopilot was disengaged and they began a visual descent to a safe landing. At the wrong airport.
So you can tell from the airline involved, this was not a recent example. However, the wrong surface landings and operations in general are occurring more often than you might think. And I'll let Bridget talk more about that. But first of all, let's define our terms. What exactly is a wrong surface operation? Wrong surface events occur when an aircraft lands or departs or tries to land or depart on the wrong runway, taxiway, or even at the wrong airport. Now, one of the more famous cases of this was the actor Harrison Ford, who landed on a parallel taxiway to the runway in which he was trying to land. Now, a lot of people criticized Harrison Ford, but I think the guy actually did really well because at least he found the right airport. A number of our fellow pilots aren't even doing that. And it begs the question, well, how often is this happening? And who are the pilots that are making these mistakes? Am I, as a pilot, susceptible to such an error? I would certainly hope not. But hopefully by the end of this class, you'll come away with more knowledge and empowerment to avoid becoming one of these statistics. Now, again, I said, well, who are pilots that are making these? Surely it's got to be student pilots, low-time pilots, and that sort of thing. And maybe that's true. Let me show you a video, and then I'll have Bridget talk about who is it that are making these mistakes and how often is it happening?
First off, we have the Boeing Dreamlifter jet out there at Jaberra Airport. It was headed to McConnell Air Force Base last night about 9:20. It made the landing at Jaberra mistakenly, thinking that it was McConnell Air Force Base. It's been sitting there since then.
A hard landing and the smell of burning rubber, two indications to passengers on Southwest Flight 4013 that something was wrong after their plane landed at the wrong airport, coming within 300 feet of a steep embankment at the end of the runway.
A Delta Airlines flight from Minneapolis to Rapid City landed by mistake at Ellsworth Air Force Base last night. The Airbus A320 aircraft had 130 passengers on board when it made its errant landing. Armed military personnel walked through the cabin with bomb-sniffing dogs while the airplane was at the base. Passengers were ordered to keep their window shades down.
We're following this news alert in Tampa. It's a giant, an Air Force C-17 landed at the wrong airport. Officials are trying to figure out how the mistake happened. Now, the huge military jet was headed to MacDill Air Force Base, but the pilot landed at Peter O'Knight, a small municipal airport on nearby Davis Islands. Fox 13's Steph DiPietrantonio is live at Peter O'Knight. And Steph, big cargo jet, small runway. How are they going to fix it?
Bridget, how indeed do they fix that? And what's your takeaways from that video?
So quite a few, actually. The big thing here is that these wrong surface operations can happen at any level, right? So pilot experience here obviously was pretty thorough. You had some military jets, you have commercial aircraft. It can happen to any type of aircraft, right? And it can also happen at any airport. These events that you saw just happen to be the ones that hit the news. One thing that I do want to do is look at the data. So what is the wrong surface arrival data showing us? Between 2016 and 2019, we've had over 1,000 aircraft that have actually arrived to the wrong surface. Guys, this data here that we're showing you is for towered airports. So if you're at an uncontrolled airport or if the tower is closed, I wouldn't have the report on that. So this is only for operational towers. For the instance here, 81% of these 1,000 occurrences were general aviation. 85% of the time they're happening at small or medium airports. 87% of the time they're happening during daylight operations, and 95% of the time they're occurring with visibility of 3 statute miles or greater. What you don't see here is that 20% of these 1,000 occurrences actually had a conflict event. So in other words, the aircraft that was arriving to a surface that had another vehicle on it, or it actually had another aircraft on it. In other words, the risk during these events can be pretty significant. Another couple of events that we didn't mention here on that previous video was we had a Boeing 767 that landed on taxiway Mike out in Atlanta in 2009. We've had a 737 that landed on taxiway Tango out in Seattle. And so these, like I said, it can be any type of aircraft, can be any type of pilot proficiency too, or experience. That brings us into wrong surface departures. That's another piece that we really want to highlight today. From 2016 to 2019, we've had over 700 aircraft that have departed the wrong surface. So with that being said, again, those are occurring at airports that are towered. We wouldn't have the data if we didn't know, but we wouldn't have known that the occurrence took place if it wasn't at a towered facility. Also, 83% of the time, general aviation. 89% of the time, they're happening at medium, small airports. And then 86% of the time they're happening during daylight operations. When we first started looking at this information, I actually inherently thought that more of them would be occurring at night, but I was wrong in saying so. What this actually boils down to, if I'm just looking at the reports themselves and just looking at the alignments, I'm not necessarily looking to wheels on the ground. When it comes to wrong surface arrivals, I'm looking at a wrong surface arrival pretty much every day in the NAS. Now, when it comes to wrong surface departures, I'm seeing them pretty much every other day in the National Airspace System. And I know we're just pretty much going over data at this point in time, but I did want to take a quick second for any questions.
Bridget, we haven't had any bunch of questions come in yet, but we did talk about one earlier today wherein at the page, they've changed their procedure when people are ready to depart from a runway. And they would normally tell you hold short, runway 28 left, and they were obliged to call back with that. And now that Tower has changed their policy to just simply stand by. Is that something that's common, something we should be seeing happening more often?
There could have been a few things that took place there. With that being said, I'll talk about readbacks for a second. With regards to readbacks, in particular with hold short, I need to make sure that I hear the pilot acknowledge with a full call sign. So if you just said Cirrus, or if you just said 5 Lima Papa, if you didn't have your full call sign, that doesn't complete that pilot controller loop for us. As well as I need a complete runway. So I would need, say you had 9 left and 9 right, for instance. If you only said, all right, I'm going to hold short of 9, it wouldn't be efficient for us or sufficient for us, because I would need to hear the runway 9 left or the runway 9 right. I need that whole element there. Even to the point of, I just said, if I heard holding, I would need to acknowledge you again. So in this case, now this is pretty airport specific. I don't necessarily see that occurring throughout the NAS. However, what I would say is something probably happened at your airport where they're trying to basically subdue that and make sure that they don't have another runway incursion inherently by somebody getting out onto the runway. Richard, do you want to add to that at all?
Yeah, as it applies to wrong surface operations, you might be surprised to hear that almost 100% of the time, the readback of the assigned runway was correct. The readback was correct. So as air traffic controllers, as we communicate and we try to close that loop, et cetera, that's not the piece that's missing. It's some human factors that happen behind the scenes that are leading to these wrong service operations. While I get an accurate readback from you, I'm still not off the hook. I'm still going to watch you, because I know, as it applies to wrong surface, there's some things going to happen between the time I assigned you your landing surface or your departure surface and when you actually execute that operation, that things may go south.
Yeah, another reason why they might be doing that as well is just because of how busy they are. So occasionally, if I'm super busy, I won't just say, I might just key up and say Roger, because I can't afford to make sure that I get that entire read back. I just need to continue. That's just some of my experiences at DFW. I know that Portland doesn't get that busy. Just saying.
Yeah. And Richard, we're actually getting a whole bunch of questions now. I think in the interest of time, however, why don't you guys go ahead and continue, and we're going to hold these questions until we get to the next question break. So please continue.
Sounds good. So the next thing that I want to talk about is really that there are some principal causes with wrong surface events. So in these characteristics not only occur with wrong surface arrivals or alignments, but also on the departure segment as well. What we're looking at here is airport geometry, communication, expectation bias, distractions, and environmental issues. We're actually going to show you some real life events, a couple different videos that took place, or a couple different scenarios. In those scenarios, see if you can pick up on any one of these characteristics, because it's not just one of these principal causes. Usually there's multiple ones that take place. So with that being said, Richard, would you mind discussing airport geometry a little further?
This one, this is a big one, and you can go clear back to the Lexington crash, and you really start to see how airport geometry really plays a big part in this. Again, if you're not familiar with that one, that's where the regional jet departed the wrong runway, but the thresholds of the two runways nearly overlapped. They were right next to each other. And so instead of turning onto one runway, they turned onto another one, and we all know the result of that. Airport geometry is very, very important. Usually airports located in close proximity with the same runway alignment. You'd be surprised how many of them there are in the system. If you fly in the West Coast, for example, up in my area, out in Spokane, you have Spokane Geiger Field, and you have Fairchild Air Force Base with nearly same runway layout and not that far apart. Closer to my airport, at Portland International, back in the day, we actually had a TWA 727 land at a small GA airport not far from Portland International that has nearly the same runway alignment. Runway and taxiway alignment really plays a big part in that. In fact, parallel and offset parallel runway configurations contribute more to wrong surface operations than any other. So for example, if you have two parallel runways, but they're offset, they're staggered by maybe 500 to 1,000 feet. As you see in the photo on the right, you're going to see two arrows. Those are two parallel runways. But notice how far apart they are and how staggered those thresholds are. If you were assigned the far right runway, but you were coming in on a base leg from the south, you may just see that taxiway as the parallel runway and land on that south runway. It's really, really common. In fact, 50% of wrong surface landings are attributed to parallel runways with offset threshold. What do we do about this? Well, one thing we can do is, as we're flight planning, if we're going to an unfamiliar airport, we can take note of, do they have parallel runway? Key flag, right? And do they have parallel runways with offset threshold? So we know that as we flight plan, this is something we need to be aware of. Here's another one. 75% of wrong surface landings are attributed to parallel runway. And we're not necessarily including a parallel taxiway to a parallel runway, but parallel runways. And that's the way most airports are laid out, with some parallel runways. Let me give you an example of that. Here's a fellow Cirrus pilot who back in 2015 was inbound to Boston Logan. Now the aircraft was assigned runway 4 left. It's a visual approach to runway 4 left, and I'm going to show you a video. The dark surfaces that you'll see are the runway. The gray surfaces that you'll see are the taxiway. So you're going to hear the controller, Mr. Nuncio, does a great job. He's working traffic. He's a 23-year veteran, so he knows that something doesn't look right. You're going to see a little aircraft come in from the bottom of your screen and attempt to land on one of the gray surfaces. Let's view that video.
2461, monitor the tower 132.22.
3222, scan 6461.
Six Bravo Juliet, go around. 6 Bravo Juliet, go around, please, go around.
6 Bravo Juliet, going around.
That was, you were lined up for a taxiway, 6 Bravo Juliet. Fly runway heading and climb, maintain, are you on a VFR or IFR flight?
We're IFR, sir.
Okay, climb, maintain, for now, just maintain 2000. I'll check with approach, see if I can bring it right back around.
2000, 6 Bravo Juliet.
I thought Nunzio remained pretty calm through that whole thing. You'll see that the Cirrus was lined up to be nose to nose with an opposite direction taxiing Embraer 190, in which the outcome would have been catastrophic. Interestingly, on that visual approach, and you're going to see visual approaches are a big player in this, that exact visual approach, a Dash 8 from a commuter airline, did the exact same thing not 3 years later. Once again, the controller caught it and sent the aircraft around. Here we have parallel runways, and we have parallel taxiways to those, some offset thresholds. You'll also notice at Boston Logan, there are some of the thresholds that are closely aligned, close together. Your takeaway should not be don't fly into Boston Logan, but rather wherever you're going, identify some of these key factors that might make you a potential for becoming one of these statistics. So let's talk about another one of the key principles that lead to wrong surface operations.
Yeah, I want to talk about communication for a second, Richard. So communication, or as I like to say, miscommunication, or lack thereof communication. The big thing I want to say is, please don't just parrot us. We see that quite frequently in events. Try to actively listen and make sure that you're communicating. I know actively listening is difficult. It's difficult for me to even do it at home sometimes, right? So, but really try to not parrot us. If you don't understand what's being said, if you're not quite or if maybe you didn't quite pick up what they said, then please just ask for the controller to clarify. It's a lot easier to clarify than to land on the wrong surface. Or like I mentioned before, 20% of all these events have a conflict involved. You really do not want to come head to head with somebody else, by all means. And when I'm circling around this communication piece, I like to mention that because of the close proximities of runways and taxiways, as well as the locations of some towers throughout the NAS, controllers may not be able to see where you are. So our communication between one another is sometimes the only indicator if you're actually aligned with the wrong surface. So in some places, you may actually see a controller asking you, hey, just verify you're lined up for 10 right, for instance. That could be because from their depth perception, it could be very challenging for them to indicate whether or not you are actually lining up for the left, the right, or even the grass. I'll share a story with you. I was at Flying Cloud. I actually go to several different airports throughout the NAS every year. I was up in the tower, and they happened to have a P-51 that was taxiing out. Great aircraft, by all means. Anyways, the controller asked him, hey, can you do one trip in the pattern? We happen to have some people here from DC. I'm like, okay. He does one trip in the pattern. I'll be honest, I could not differentiate between if he was lined up for a runway, a taxiway, or even the grass. And that was purely based on the location of that tower versus the proximity to where he was on that glide path. Now, when you're a controller there and I'm keying up the mic all the time, I can tell a little bit better with depth perception, angle of attack, hey, is it a little bit high, is he a little bit low? That can help me differentiate what you're actually aligned for, but you can expect more so for controllers to be indicating, hey, where are you actually lined up for? I just want to verify you're lined up for the surface, because wrong surface arrivals and departures actually is a top 5 within the NAS for the controller. So it's one of the biggest key elements that we're working on. Richard, another one happens to be expectation bias. Would you mind discussing that a little further?
I will, because expectation bias, it's one of my favorite. I really like to explore the human factors as to why people do the things they do. I don't think people are inherently dumb or anything like that, but they seem to make really silly mistakes. For example, landing at the wrong airport. But what is it that caused that to happen? One of the big ones is expectation bias. And basically this occurs when an individual's expectations or our previous experiences outweigh our judgment to what's happening now. It influences our perceptions of our actions and our behaviors. So how does this apply to wrong surface? Well, one way it might apply is that you mistake the runway, or I'm sorry, an airport between you and your destination as being your assigned airport. So what I mean is, often as controllers, if you're coming in on a base leg or something like that, or even on a straight in, as we saw from that Continental video at the beginning, even though I may clear you for the approach, etc., there might be an airport between you and your intended destination. And so what happens is pilots see a surface and they're like, oh, that's it. Oh, we might be a little high. We got to get down. And that expectation bias starts to take over. Another way we see this, for example, is and this is one of our pet peeves, by the way, a pilot will call me with something that I can get back to, but I have a more pressing issue I need to address right now. And so I will ignore that call and I will talk to somebody else. And inevitably, because of expectation bias, the pilot who called me expects that that next transmission is going to be for them, and therefore they just answer. And it's really kind of funny, because I might have a Cessna 12345 say, I'm ready for takeoff. My next transmission is Delta so-and-so, you're cleared to land. And somehow the Cessna hears that as, we're clear for takeoff. I never said your call sign. It doesn't make any sense what I told you, but expectation bias is your next call is to me no matter what, and you're going to give me this instruction. It happens all the time, every shift, at least once. So expectation bias is a big piece there. Another one, pilots don't visually confirm their assigned runway. They're going by rote action, right? They're just kind of coasting. One of the times I saw this, I was in Texas, and there was an energy company down there, and their pilots were attending a class I was talking about, where we were talking about this very issue. Now, this energy company flew from some G650, some Gulfstream 650s, and I know this because I made the mistake of calling them G6s. They paid a lot of millions for that extra 50. So if you ever come across a G650 pilot, make sure you acknowledge that extra 50. So the pilots raised his hand in the back, and he said, hey, listen, if I could share my story. We were in Memphis just last week, and we had this happen to us. I said, please tell me about it. He said, we were taxiing out. They gave us a takeoff clearance. And as the captain was taking the aircraft around the corner to take off, the co-pilot realized that, wait, we're on a taxiway. And fortunately, they caught it just in time. And I said, well, how did that happen? He said, you have no idea how wide the taxiways are in Memphis to accommodate all the FedEx heavies they have out there. The surface was so wide that he wasn't ready that might be the taxiway. It was so wide, he's all like, this is the runway. Expectation bias. Another area we see that pilots don't utilize the information that they might have available to them. Geographical indicators or cues. Why? Because we're just going through the motion. Don't just go through the motions. That's how expectation bias will get you. Let me show you a video of this. Now, let me set this video up. What you're going to hear the audio from the ground controller. You're not going to hear tower. You're going to hear the ground control. And in this situation, we have a business jet who's taxiing out for departure. And you have another pilot that's also taxiing out in an airliner for departure. There's a taxiway closure that's happening on the airport. It's at dusk. So with that, let's look at it. And Bridget, I'll get your opinion on the takeaways from this video.
After dark on a weekday in late November 2016, .com 4193 contacted ground control to request taxi for departure. Ground control issued instructions to runway 15 left via taxiways Whiskey Bravo and Whiskey Victor. The pilot read the instructions back correctly.
Okay, we have Kilo, so we're going to do 15 left, and we taxi on Whiskey Bravo, hold short of Whiskey Golf for .com 43.
Parallel to the runway, another taxiway, Whiskey Alpha, had a section closed for repair. Unfortunately, unnoticed by ATC, .com 4193 lined up on Whiskey Alpha and took off. A short time later, another pilot brought it to ATC's attention.
That B ship just took off. What did he do?
What did he just do about what?
You sure he went off left, 15 left?
And yes, he took off on side left.
The errant .com 4193 hit two barricades as it rotated, leaving tire marks, but making it successfully into the air. Personnel working near taxiway Whiskey Alpha made it successfully home that night. What could have been done to increase the situational awareness on the part of the pilot and ATC?
What do you think, Bridget? What could they have done? What were some of the contributing factors in that?
So one thing that you guys can't really see on there is on the ground, there's paint that actually leads you from that outer taxiway or the inner taxiway to the terminal to the outer one. It makes a little curve, right? So that aircraft, what he did, he was just following the line. So he followed the line, made the left-hand turn on the first segment, which happened to be a fairly wide taxiway, thinking it was a runway, and then he departed. That's a big piece of that. We've actually had that occurrence. These types of same occurrences at other airports, and one airport in particular that I visited, they've now actually removed that lead-in turn line to that outer taxiway. So now they just keep the one turn line where it goes from the turn from the taxiway up perpendicular to the runway itself for departure. Another piece here is, this is more of a gee whiz information, but that threshold from that tower, or the threshold for that runway to the tower, is 2 miles away. So what I like to ask is, the information that regional jet was giving was a little inquisitive, right? So, hey, where did that guy depart? Instead of just saying, hey, that guy departed off the taxiway. Well, you don't know is that Beach Jet, when he got to his arrival airport, that's when he realized that he hit the barricades. He did not know prior to. Now, the barricades out there are meant to they're filled with water. They're meant to be hit. Like they can move out of the way fairly quickly. It's collapsible, right? So it was okay. There wasn't much damage to the aircraft, but again, the controller didn't recognize the fact that he departed from the taxiway, and the aircraft that departed from the taxiway didn't recognize it until he got back and was like, hey, what happened here? So please, if you see something, see something, say something, but be fairly direct with what you see. The next part I would like to talk about here is cockpit distractions a little bit more. So what I highly suggest, especially when operating with a single pilot and you've got passengers on board, introduce a sterile cockpit environment. So meaning if you're taxiing out, or if you're getting ready for departure, if you're coming into land, making sure that you minimize any type of distractions with just basic gee whiz conversation, right? So try to emphasize that sterile cockpit under those type of different phases of flight. Another thing that I want to bring up is just multitasking. As humans, we're not really good at multitasking. We can't really multitask in the first place, but we like to bring it up. So for single pilots in particular, when you're taxiing out, try not to be multitasking. So that can be really compared to just texting and driving, for instance, as an example. For me as a controller, I don't like to give amended clearances to general aviation in particular when they're taxiing out. I will stop you. I will put you in a place, or I'll wait till you get up to the edge of the runway, give you your amended clearance, and just say, hey, let me know when you're ready to go. That is just a rule of thumb for myself to help with mitigating any distractions in the cockpit. We talked about several different causal contributing factors in particular. With cockpit distractions, we don't usually think about fatigue, but that's another piece of the puzzle. And that's actually really going to lead us into the video that we're going to watch here. This is a very close proximity event. It happened out of San Francisco. We have, it's the Air Canada event, if you're familiar with it. We have an A320 that's on final. That gets between, and it depends on who you ask and what video you look at, between 19 feet and 30 feet, colliding with 4 different aircraft on a taxiway. The aircraft on those taxiways happen to be 2 Boeing 787s, one 737-900 series, and an A340, all full of people as well as full of fuel. Let's go ahead and watch the video, and I'll give you some more information after the fact.
A couple of ones. Frontier 1431, go ahead.
Yeah, gates occupied. Don't have any contact with our ops anyway.
Nope, just switch over to the ramp and they'll hold you in there somewhere.
Okay, thanks.
Channel 7658 Heavy, runway 28 right, taxi right, turn Alpha short of Bravo 1.
Alpha short of Bravo 1, 2
Take right hand. Hold on.
Runway there, across the runway, can you confirm the clear to land?
Air Canada 759, confirmed, clear to land, runway 28 right, there's no one on 28 right but you.
Okay.
Okay, so I can hold the one.
Yeah, going.
Okay, thanks. Who is
He's on the taxiway. San Francisco Ground, American 274 at Superway, requested hit to 57.
Air Canada go around?
We go around, Air Canada 759.
Air Canada 759, looked like you were lined up for Charlie there. Flight heading 280, climb maintain 3000.
Heading 280, 3000, Air Canada 759.
Thankfully, we obviously did not have a collision there, but by all means, that would have been the worst aviation accident in history if they would have collided. A couple other elements here. Air Canada was actually on a charted visual approach. That approach itself is primarily used for noise abatement purposes. Unfortunately, they did not back that approach up with an ILS. I mentioned fatigue as part of that whole cockpit distraction conversation. With that, the crew had a body clock time of 3 o'clock in the morning. The first officer had no assigned rest for 12 hours. The captain had no assigned rest for 19 hours. To be honest, if it would have been a U.S. carrier, they never would have been able to depart. Subsequently, post-event, Air Canada has changed their regulations to be much more restrictive. And now with that rest, with the rest time, there would not have been able to have departed as well. There was construction on runway 28 left, so hopefully you guys would have noticed the X's on 28 left as they were lit. There's traffic on taxiway Charlie, which was right of 28 right. That traffic normally wouldn't have been there if 28 left would have been open. They actually would have been, that traffic would have been on the left side of runway 28 left. A lot of questions I get right away is, hey, why didn't the controller say, why didn't the controller see it? I've been in San Francisco's tower at night on several occasions, in particular working on runway status lights. I will tell you from standing in that tower, when the aircraft are coming over the water, right? There's two very close proximity runways that are fairly wide runways. There's also two parallel taxiways to those runways. It is very difficult to determine what runway that aircraft is aligned for. So keep that in mind as well. The depth perception there, especially at night, for that in particular is difficult. So what have they done after the incident? So I mentioned the regulation change in Canada. Also, so for San Francisco in particular, they moved the construction start time. So those 4 aircraft that you saw that were going out for departure, some of those were going to Asia. Another one was, that 737 was going to the East Coast and heading out to the East. So now they don't start any evening construction until after that last bank has come through. So they depart all those aircraft there, and then they'll go ahead and close one of the subsequent runways. If for whatever reason they do have to have a prolonged closure where one of those runways is closed, what they'll do is at night they actually put you on an ILS. They no longer will utilize that charted visual approach into one of those runways. Additionally, they keep additional staffing in the tower until after that last push comes through as well. That's pretty much it with San Francisco. It was an eye-opening event. There's been several changes within the agency itself. We've done several safety risk management panels preceding this event to make sure that we have increased the safety within the NAS relative to these types of events. But next I want to kind of talk about environmental issues, which you could probably pick out some of those from the San Francisco event itself.
Absolutely. Operations at night or at dusk is always tough. We've all been there where you might be driving into the sunset, you pull up to a stoplight, but you can't see the light because you're looking right into the sun. I literally had this happen yesterday as I was trying to clear aircraft to land. The reflection off the freshly wet pavement was so intense that I couldn't identify aircraft as they were trying to land. So it definitely complicates things. Obviously rain, snow. In the Continental example that we started out with, there were pockets of clouds around, which contributed to the disorientation of the flight crew. Nighttime conditions, for example, at Portland, the roadway that leads into the airport is a nice, bright, straight surface and can and has been mistaken as a runway. So there are all these environmental issues, but remember what Bridget said right at the beginning. She said that 87% of these happen during daylight hours and 95% are in a VFR condition. So while these are contributing factors, they're not the end all be all. So those are the 5 issues that mostly contribute to these wrong service operations. Why don't we take a break here and see if there are any questions, John?
Yeah, Richard and Bridget, we got a ton of them. So I'll try to go through them quickly, and we'll probably just ask for really short answers if you can. First question comes in: if tower clears a plane to land and does not see the aircraft, is there any requirement to notify the crew that, one, the airplane is not in sight, and two, there's another airport in proximity?
Yes to the first one, no to the second one. My phraseology is not in sight, cleared to land. Now, if that doesn't include somebody on an ILS or something like that, but if I expect you to be somewhere and I don't see you, then my phraseology is not in sight. I can still clear you land, but I have to inform you that you're not in sight. However, if you've ever been in a tower, you will see panic. If I do not see an aircraft where I expect to see an aircraft, you're going to see people panicking, grabbing binoculars, asking for help to find out where is this aircraft. And of course, with smaller aircraft such as the Cirrus, that can happen a bit. Yes, there's that phraseology requirement.
Very good. What kind of FAA or legal consequences occur after an incorrect landing such as these?
Bridget, you want to take that one?
Obviously, we file a report called a mandatory occurrence report when we have an aircraft that arrives to the wrong surface. You'll probably be getting a phone call from Flight Standards in particular. Basically, what I have seen in recent years in particular is a big change. So I started flying when I was 16. Okay. Subsequently got my first job at 16 as well, right? With that, I was always deathly afraid of, oh my gosh, if I do something wrong, I'm going to lose my ticket. Things have changed quite dramatically. I sometimes call it the kinder, gentler new FAA, even compared to when I first got employed by the FAA as a controller to where I am now. Mostly what happens now is just remedial training. You'll go in, as long as you're free and willing to educate yourselves a little bit further, then you're fine. I haven't really seen anything other than that, as long as the individual is willing to learn.
As an ATC person, how often are you correcting pilots?
Well, I don't know what they mean by correcting. Listen, we're all human. I have pilots and I expect pilots to correct me when I'm wrong. And fortunately, they do. It happens every day. I wouldn't say multiple times. I know that science says that that adult humans will make 6 to 8 mistakes per hour. Usually they're very benign, but we all make mistakes. It happens every day on a couple occasions where we're going to make mistakes, but that's the reason why we do the backups, etc. And as Bridget said earlier, if you see something that doesn't seem right, or if you're confused and you're not sure, part about communication is ask.
And dare I ask, are Cirrus pilots any worse than others?
I flew the fifth. No. I actually enjoy working Cirruses. Your proficiency is typically a lot better than what I've seen. So if I see a Cirrus pilot, I'm not as much on my toes. I'm obviously still paying attention, adhering to making sure that everything that is said is being completed. One thing I want to mention earlier is reference the comment or reference the question on if we see you and we give you can we give you a landing clearance or not, or if we don't see you rather. The whole part of, I want to reference some of the stuff that I've been talking about before, whereas what I was primarily talking about with the not being able to see you is the alignment piece. We can see you out the window and more times than not, right? If it's VFR, by all means. However, I might not be able to differentiate your alignment because of the proximity to whether the close proximity of the runways or the taxiways, or the close proximity of the tower to the runways or taxiways. So the seeing you portion with relative to wrong surface in particular has more to do with what you're actually aligned with, not necessarily like not being able to see you at all.
When you compare the difference between towered and non-towered airports where people are landing on the wrong surfaces, where's the greater danger in your eyes?
That's a difficult question, because so for the uncontrolled and non-towered airports, I don't have any data relative to that because I'm not getting the reports because there's no one to file the reports, right? For towered facilities, obviously we are there to control that environment. So I would say there's significant risk potential in either location. Depends on how you define risk. Some people define risk in more of a eminent like commercial versus general aviation. So really, it just depends on what you're looking at. There's risk in both occurrences. It's just with the towered environment, you have an extra set of eyes that are multiple sets of eyes that are trying
to help you out, right? If we're ever in a situation where we mistakenly line up on the wrong runway and notice it before landing or taking off, what action should we take as the pilot messing up to help resolve the situation?
Well, for me, if you notice it before I do, I would like you to say, hey, I think we're lined up for the wrong runway. We're correcting. We're correcting back. Or if you're just completely lost all your situational awareness, to say, I don't think I'm in the right spot. Can you help me out? So we always want to know pilot intentions. So I would simply tell the controller your pilot intentions, whether you're fixing the problem or you're still confused.
Yeah, and I would also indicate, don't be afraid just to go around and do it again. Because so once you lose that situational awareness, what else? We talk about multitasking before, right? And distractions. We have some pretty wide, expansive taxiways as well as runways out there, right? So now if you've misconstrued one runway to think it's the runway that you're supposed to be aligned with, what's next? So is that just opening up the pendulum to that Swiss cheese model? Don't be afraid to just say, we're executing a go around. I believe I lined up with the wrong surface. Go out there and do it again. It's okay.
Right. And there was actually a follow-up question. You spoke of the panic in the tower when the controller can't find the aircraft. And I think what you're saying is that, it's reasonable that the GA pilot who's VFR just be asked to go around so the controller get them in sight. Is that sort of the sentiment that you were going for?
Well, it's impossible to answer because every situation is different.
Fair enough. Tell you what, we're actually getting inundated with questions. We only got 12 minutes to go, Richard, so I should let you get going.
I'll go ahead and continue here just with best practices. I'll try to fly through these through these slides a little bit faster than I normally would, just so that we can get to additional questions. But so best practices to avoid these type of occurrences, right? One, I want you guys to recognize the fact that this can happen to anyone. It can happen to you. So please be prepared. The best way to prevent these type of occurrences is what I just said. Be prepared. Okay. Make sure you're pre-flighting as much as practical, just pre-planning in general. Reduce the distractions as much as possible. Avoid any unnecessary conversations. Using those visual cues, even on your airport diagram, as simple as that. So, hey, the terminals are supposed to be to my right-hand side, or the terminals are supposed to be to my left-hand side, or hey, that hangar I'm supposed to be going to is supposed to be indicative on my right or left. Make sure you're using those visual cues. Next would be utilize GPS when it's available, but only if you're comfortable with it. Don't let the GPS become a distraction either. Or like I said, if you can back it up with a localizer, do that as well, but don't let it inhibit you. I honestly have never read a report that has where the aircraft had backed up their runway with a localizer, or honestly even with the GPS. I've never read that in a report. Next, I would say be on the lookout for that expectation bias. Richard went into that pretty thoroughly and well. One thing I want to mention, if this is your home base, don't fall back on past experiences. So if you're used to always landing on the right, don't expect to always get the right. Expect the unexpected. I actually train that when I'm training a controller. I expect you to do the wrong thing so that I can catch it. But we just want to make sure that we're cognizant of that as we're going through. And then on the next slide, make sure you're actively listening. Don't just parrot us. I'm trying more so to actively listen at home than what I have in the past. But again, utilize proper phraseology. It helps complete the pilot controller communication loop. And if you're ever in doubt, make sure that you clarify and ask us. I know one of the things I like to say when I'm in particular in person doing these, one of the first things I like to say is, hey, do I look scary? Usually get a little chuckle here and there. With that being said, I say that because I'm the person on the other side of the mic. I'm the human, and so is Richard. So there's a human element to this. I would much rather you clarify and ask me a question than land on the wrong surface and it happen to be one of those conflict events that I talked about. We do have a few more minutes here for additional questions, so I want to go ahead and open that back up.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Bridget. And I'll try to race through these, maybe about 6 more left here. One question that came in, I know the answer to this one, but I'll let you guys make a comment. I've used progressive taxi on landing. Can I also request progressive taxi on departure, or is that not acceptable?
Oh, absolutely. That's acceptable. I don't care whether you're landing or whether you're departing or arriving. It makes no difference. Progressive taxi, I would love for you to tell me. I can't remember the last time somebody asked me for a progressive, but they'll sure guess. Absolutely do. Another thing, and that applies to on the ground. If you're in the air, let's say you're flying into airspace that you are unfamiliar with. It is okay to tell me I'm unfamiliar. If you're a student pilot, it's okay to say I'm a student pilot. I'm going to treat you with kid gloves. I'm going to give you extra attention. I may not run a squeeze play with you. I may wait until I have a nice big hole to work with you in, but I would much rather know that, and you're going to get some extra attention from me.
Yeah, and even if you're VFR just out and about, you can ask for a suggested heading just to get you in the right direction again, or just to have it, can you verify my position? I don't quite have this airport in sight yet. Just say something so that we know that you need that additional help. The other thing is, if you're a CFI or double I out there, please, if you have a solo student out there, I highly suggest them saying, hey, I'm a solo student pilot. That will allow me, because what you don't see is I'm working tower, we'll say Richard's on departure. I'll key up to Richard and say, hey, student pilot on 656 or whatever. And that we can help the next controller down the road, and we'll continue to keep our eyes on you as much as possible. Sometimes that communication doesn't take place between the controllers, but many times it does.
Good tip. What is the most common improper pilot phraseology contributing to wrong surfaces? Any thoughts on that?
What do you think, Bridget?
I'd just say lack of readback. Is it, so my next question would be, is it required for me to get a runway assignment with that readback when you're landing? No, not really, right? So I would say make sure that you give complete readbacks. Don't just say you're clear to land on the left, clear to land on the right. Lackadaisicalness, complacency is a big one. So that I'm going to open the waters up a little bit more, because complacency I'm seeing more and more in particular, right? So just get back to your basics and make sure that whatever you're trying to communicate with us, that you just dot your I's and cross your T's. That way it just is utilize professionalism across the board.
And when Bridget says complacency, we're not talking laziness. That's not the definition of complacency. Complacency, what we're talking about is just going through the motions. We've done this flight 100 times, and so we just start going through the motions. Harrison Ford had landed at that airport numerous times when he landed on a parallel taxiway. There were other human factors, things that involved there that I've since found out. But again, there was some complacency, just kind of going through the motions, and we all do it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay, if you are cleared for a visual approach, does Tower care if you just informally fly a charted approach to ensure you're lined up with the correct runway and have terrain clearance?
I'd say more times than not, no, just let us know what you're doing. And so it goes back to that communication piece. Hey, I'm going to enter, a lot of times, so some of these wrong surface events are actually aircraft in their own traffic pattern for that runway, and they've been on that traffic pattern for multiple times, and then they just subsequently land on the adjacent runway or on the taxiway, for instance. If you want to enter, if you're coming in VFR and you want to enter on a 4-mile straight in so that you can, track the localizer inbound, just let the controller know so they knows. Or hey, likewise, if you were going direct to the numbers, now you're going to turn it out a little bit left. Just that way I can plan, because I have other departures that are going to need to go out as well.
Right.
And I have to take a second to highlight that, just because what she said it's just at the crux of it all. Communication is not simply parroting what we said, which you heard Bridget say before. If you take nothing more from this, take that away. Communication is not just parroting what somebody else said. It's rather, it's letting us know what your intentions are. What are you going to do? I'm correcting, or I'm lost, or I want to fly this charted visual. All of that, that's communication.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent.
And it allows us to pre-plan. So a lot of times I think we feel like, because I did it when when I'm out flying, I think, well, I'm the only one out here. But what you don't recognize is, that controller could be talking to another 20 aircraft and not just you. So keep that in mind, because I have a plan that I need to keep set up, and if I need to adjust that plan, I can.
Right. One last question for you guys. I'll let you guys talk to this one. Do you have any data regarding occurrences at surfaces that are familiar to the pilots versus surfaces that are unfamiliar to the pilot?
I can speak with that to it depends on the airport. So there are certain airports in the NAS that have a higher frequency of wrong surface events. with that in particular, those airports we've looked at a little bit more in depth. That's when we're going to be able to look at additional reporting to find out, hey, where are you actually based out of, and so on and so forth. I will tell you that I have spoken directly with CFIs and CFIIs who have accidentally landed on the wrong surface at their own based airports.
Okay.
The laundry list, unfortunately, it really doesn't matter. It just depends on that airport in particular.
It just happens. It certainly just happens. Okay, well, Bridget and Richard, thank you very much for sharing your time on a Sunday, and very, very, very kind of you to take time to help us all become safer pilots. We very much appreciate you coming to the session today. So with that, let me tell people about our next session, which is going to be with the award-winning Bill Frank. He's a very popular speaker with the CPPP or COPA community. And since it's getting to be around fall, icing, everybody's favorite topic for forecasts and in-flight, will be shared on October 24th. You can see the tiny URL there. Just click that into your favorite browser, and you should be able to sign up and register early for that session. Also, we're always looking for just a little bit extra to kind of keep the lights on here at COPA University. You all have very generously helped us exceed our $5,000 donation goal. We are now upped it to 10. So if you guys would still find this valuable, we appreciate you going to that tiny URL and making a contribution today, if you would please. And so, Bridget and Richard, thank you very much for coming on. Did you want to have any final thoughts as we sign off?
Communicate. Tell us what you're going to do.
Always a good idea indeed. Thank you again both for coming. See you again soon.
Bye, guys.